I'm not a pure computer scientist by training. I did study electrical and computer engineering here, and while I was doing that, I did the BSc Comp Sci section, so familiar with the building and the people. It's great to be back in here. My personal credo is never waste a drop of talent, and so it's quite significant for me to be able to come in here and chat to you about agile methods, because I think agile methods are something that help us to not waste our talent when we get into the world. And I've seen a lot of talent wasted in misguided projects, and when things, when bureaucracy really takes over and gets in the way. So today I'm going to introduce you to the why and the what of Agile. So why we do Agile, what we do when we do Agile. And I'll touch very briefly on the how. But if there's a good interest after today, we'll do a couple more colloquia, or maybe over to a seminar format on specific practices of Agile. So today I'm going to explore some of the tensions that led us to want to do this thing called Agile. Look at where the term Agile comes from, and then, as I said, go into a bit of the how, look at what Agile looks like and how some of the methods actually help us to get Agile. So to kick us off, room full of honor students, mostly. So who here has done an undergraduate project? Please, by show of hands. Okay, good. Today is Valentine's Day. Who here has given a Valentine or thought about giving a Valentine's gift? Ever? In the history. Or maybe even thought about receiving one. Awesome. Okay, so these are two things. And this is the point at which I'm going to find some chalk. So in the one side, we've got an undergraduate paper. On the other hand, we've got our undergraduate project. On the other hand, we've got a Valentine's gift. So, third question, who here has ever delivered a software product in industry? Okay, excellent. Okay, so we've got a very small smattering, so that might help us. So, how is an undergraduate project? Just to give you a concrete example, when I was here, we did the trivial FTP implementation. I don't know if you still do that. No? Okay, so in the TFTP implementation, we were given a spec for trivial FTP and asked to implement it. So how is that like delivering product in industry, building a software product? Anybody? What does this have in common? And also, how is it different from delivering a product in industry? Yeah?
You've got requirements and you have a deliverable.
Okay.
It's different is there's no maintenance.
Okay, so we got. Can everyone?
Don't change as much.
So there's no change. And such. Okay. So this is probably much bigger than most things in the industry.
Also in the real world, you dealing with real clients and real vendors. So if you have a bad project, just get that off. In the real world, you're doing this a lot of time.
So there's people and money. Get involved. Okay. Let's get over to the Valentine's present. So, yeah? Sweet. Awesome. So, Valentine's present. So how's this like delivering a product out there in the real world, to use a Jensen Bass phrasing?
Just hope they're going to like it.
Yeah. I'll rephrase that to we hope it's right. How else is it like or unlike, yeah?
No requirements.
So it's like the real world because there's no requirements? Sometimes, yeah.
There's sort of a silent agreement always.
Pardon? The silent agreement, yeah? Cool. Anyone else? Yeah, so I think we've already captured, and thanks to you, captured the essence of why these two are similar. We've said that the undergrad is well defined, and we know that if we come up with a technical solution, it's going to be successful. We're going to pass if we implement the technical solution, and unexpected bad things will happen. We're not sure what those are going to be, but we know that we're building the right thing. The Valentine's gift, we don't know what to do. Well, do we know what we want to get? Do we know what kind of what we want to get? And even a step back before that, do we know who we want to give it to? And these are all very real things. If you're sitting inside a corporate, you're trying to figure out what people want, and the first instinct is to listen to them, and they say what they want. But people don't know what they want. Your girlfriend, your boyfriend, when they tell you, oh, I'd love this weekend away at the spa, and you get it for them, they go away, they come back, oh, it was smelly, it was rainy, it was horrible. It wasn't what I wanted. On the flip side, if you sit down and you deliberate and think for the longest time, give a present which you think might be wrong, it might be too small, I'm stressed, I made this card, it's there you go. And they're delighted, you made something, it's really meaningful, and because it conveyed what was real in that situation, it was great. So, can everyone see this bottom board if I don't roll it up? I'd like to leave those up there. Or should I send it to the top? I'll bring them back down. Okay, I'll send it up. So, I was in Sweden, and Todd Little from Landmark Graphics in the States, he's been doing software for about as long as I've been alive. And he works for Landmark Graphics, and they do oil and gas exploration software. And in oil and gas, it's kind of like software in some ways. They're doing experimental stuff. They're trying to figure out where to drill, ultimately. And they, being Texans, draw this tornado of uncertainty. So at the top of this chart, so down here we've got phases. And across here, we've got this uncertainty or impact, like how the cost to benefit. So if we write it as ROI, we're pretty much close. So if we think about Valentine's gift, this is deciding what to get. Are we getting flowers, chocolate, a dress, a weekend away? That's phase of it. Slightly less risky is which one. In Valentine's, we've then got the last one, which is just going out and doing it. Sometimes that can take a while. Get to Cavendish, you don't have what you're looking for, you have to go to the waterfront, all these things happen. But there's the least risk in here. Same kind of applies when you get to software. Trying to figure out what to build, who to build it for, why to build it. Then deciding how you're actually going to build it, what technologies you're going to put in. Then actually building it. And Todd said something pithy. He's like, this portion, that's between 1/4 and 4 times what you thought it was initially going to take. Relatively low risk. That sounds like a huge inaccuracy. But if you think about the potential benefit of getting the product right, that's where we start to look at why we might want to control for more time up here, or how do we get more building straight back up to the top. In Coventry recently, Dan North used another graph to talk about these concepts. Before I get there, just going back to our contrived example of the undergrad project, up here, it's like that. You know what to build. It's in a paper. Unless you're struggling to interpret and read your briefing, you know what to build. Unless the world's so progressive now that you get to choose what you do for a simple undergrad project. But hopefully that's still a relevant example. However, when you get to build, there's variability, how long it takes you, how late you choose to build it, how stressed you are, how many other projects you have. So most of the variability is down here. On another pair of axes here, if we've got the probability of something happening or failure or a bad thing happening, and here we've got the impact. Anyone familiar with this sort of layout of risk or issues? It's kind of a traditional format. Probability is between 0 and 1. Impact is potentially infinite. What happens if this product doesn't go out? People could die, airplanes could fall out of the sky. Things could really happen. So the impact is potentially quite large. So we look at this probability and we say, shit, we don't want this to happen. We really want to stop that from happening? How do we do that? And we feel that natural tendency. I want to keep that probability down. And the industry felt that too. So software has kind of got cracking, and then in the 70s and 80s, we came up with this document-heavy process. We want to decrease our probability of doing stuff wrong. What do? We make a nice big specification document. We clearly say exactly what we're going to do. Afterwards, we'll write nice, clear documents that say exactly what it does. In between, we'll allow a little time for build, but by spending more time up front, by front-loading and thinking up front, we're going to guarantee our success. Really, what was happening, I keep putting my chalk down. I'm new to this chalk business. I thought it would be fun. Really, what is happening is that we were reinforcing the three sides of this iron triangle. By front-loading, by trying to make decisions at the beginning of a project when you have the least information possible, you're just making it seem even more rigid on your iron triangle. And this iron triangle is a feature, is one of time, when you want to ship it, the one of cost, how much it's going to count, and how much it's going to cost in people, in resources, what are you going to put into it, and of course, features. So cost, time, features form this iron triangle. That can be quite limiting and imposing, especially if you sign stuff down in the beginning and you make it really rigid. So a story from my own life that can maybe explain to you some of the pain that happens in there. I started my company consulting in software dev, and we got the dream call. Microsoft was in South Africa. Microsoft South Africa wanted us to do a project up in Joburg. The specs had all been written, and there was a 3-month push to Christmas to get it out, and they were looking for extra developers to come and join them in Joburg. This was great, right? So we flew up. The spec was about this thick. I got it on my desk. I arrived at the project. They showed me a matrix of where everybody would be working. I had my little square. I was working in the web services layer on the media stack, and it was just me, but I would take the stuff up from the guy who stored procedures, and I'd hand it up to the guy who's doing the UI layer, and I'd write my code, and it really sucked, right? We got to Christmas, and the project wasn't ready. I hadn't really read most of the spec yet because it was quite long. I'd read most of my media portion. But I quickly found that there were gaps in what had been spec'd, like what tape sizes were used in the media. And I needed to speak to the customer, but I was told, no, the specs have been written. You're the developer, build it. So luckily I managed through occasional hanging out in a coffee shop to bump into some of the guys in the media department of the company and ask them what tape sizes they used so I could make progress. And slowly I managed to break some of these little rules of how we'd been put into this box. And we came to the end of that year, and that 3 months, and Christmas came and went. And one of the Sage DBAs was asked to, Sage as in wise, not Sage as in the platform. He was asked to create new folders for timesheets for the next year. And he nodded, and he created timesheets for the next year and the year after that. So folders for people to put timesheets into. And we laughed at him, and he said, oh, just you wait. And sure enough, it was 2 years later, there I was. I'd ended up being the lead on the project, the technical lead. There were about 23 people working with me. We were on agreed, signed off version 1.1 of the spec, and we were struggling. There was almost constantly 400 issues in our backlog. We'd bash them off all the time, and more issues would come in, and at the end of the week, we'd get given these graphs because we were using we were using Team Foundation Server, and there was a framework for Agile that had been installed, and we were told that we were using this framework and that it gave us stats on our burn down bugs, and we were getting nowhere. And then I happened on a paper by Henrik Knieberg, Scrum and XP from the trenches, and I sat down with my person. I call him my first in command, but the truth is that he was much more senior than me. He was probably smart enough not to have taken the lead. And he and I sat down and we said, well, what of this stuff in here could we get away with? It sounds like freedom, promised land. So what we did was we put up a task board. We wrote stickies for all of those things that were in the backlog, because this is what you're supposed to do in these Agile methods. More on that later. But we wrote these things and we had a daily standard. We did two things, maybe three. put up a board, and we actually met with the people on our team every day, and we agreed with them what we were going to do. And that was fabulous. You might not believe me, but it was truly fabulous to actually talk to the people on your team, make commitments, and see progress, and actually get through those items. And by communicating earlier, we were able to get through stuff. And it was really top-notch. So there we were, version 1.1, great project manager. He'd managed to get it signed off. And because it's Valentine's Day, I'll share with you that right about this time, I just met the girl who was one day to be my wife. And so I said to her, it's really good to meet you. We met at a party, and I'd like to see you again, but just going down to Cape Town for a week because Microsoft is busy renegotiating this awesome contract that aren't. It's cool stuff. And please, can you, we'll keep in touch. A couple of weeks later, I went up and I was like, well, it's taking some time. About a month later, I went up and we both sat at a date and, we've both just done long-distance relationships, and we're not going to do another one. This is really stretching out. Like, if you come back to Joburg, when you come back to Joburg, let's go again. And it never renegotiated the contract between Mnet and Microsoft. So, thankfully, I had a long-distance relationship, and I'm now married to my wife. Unfortunately, that version 1.1, which we poured our souls into, like one guy literally coded on the plane while he was flying over to the developer conference in the States to get a calendar component out so we could get it done for the client. So there was no lack of commitment, no lack of passion. 95% of that system was signed off. We parallel run it with users, we'd gone through everything, but there was a critical failure to renegotiate version 2, which needed that last 5% because one portion of the entire organization couldn't use the software. But because things went south in contract land, that entire piece of software was kind of like the Ark of the Covenant in Indiana Jones. You could put it into a box at the end, put it onto a little forklift, and warehoused. 2 years of my life. About as much time with other people's lives. I was pretty pissed off then, and that's when I came back to Cape Town and I was like, okay, right. Found out a little bit about this Agile thing. These people talk about this promised land. How the hell can it work? So the project was a failure, but it did, fortunately, lead to dissatisfaction. Dissatisfaction is a really cool thing because it makes you want to change. There was a similar dissatisfaction that was happening in the late 80s, early 90s in the software industry. So this kind of predated what I did, and I got to learn from what had happened before. And this dissatisfaction with these heavyweight methods was leading to light methods. Someone trying to give up?
Tried, gave up, walked away.
Threw up the mouth. Okay, so these guys were getting together, and you may have heard some of the methods, you may have never heard of other ones. There was Crystal, there was Scrum, there was XP, there was DSDM, there was adaptive software, there was feature-driven development. People were doing these things because they were the hell in with this document-heavy thing. I'd had my first taste of it, but people had been doing this. And around 2000, the movement had kind of come together. Everyone was realizing they were doing similar things. At that point, it was called light software development, as opposed to heavy. And they agreed to meet together. They were a bunch of anarchists, and they were kind of into having fun and things like that. So they met at the lodge at the Utah Snow Ski Ranch in Snowbird Ranch. And they met together, and they came together. It was really, they disagreed. They disagreed on practices. They disagreed on how you should get lightweight down. One school, the XP school, was saying you start with telling people how to do engineering. Other school was saying, no, you start by building a framework so people can adapt themselves. And somewhere between these two, there was no middle ground. They couldn't agree on how to do this stuff. But what they could agree on, and very significantly, was on values and on principles. And the values that they agreed on, they were able to write down. And they were able to write down 12 principles. And together, this became known as the Agile Manifesto. So in honor of the fact that I had a chalkboard, they were meeting on top of this mountain, and they came up with this word, Agile. They liked the word Agile in the words of Mike Coburn, because he didn't want to be a lightweight, attending a lightweight convention to talk about lightweight methods. He kind of felt like, I think he says, I feel like a bit of a dweeb. So they came with this with Agile, and the Agile Manifesto laid down 4 key value trade-offs. Value trade-offs were that we valued individuals and interactions over process and tools. We value working software over comprehensive documentation. We value customer collaboration over contract negotiation. And we value responding to change over sticking to a plan. So, the way it was phrased was that we are uncovering new ways of doing software and helping other people to do it. Through doing it, we have come to value individuals and interactions over process and tools, working software over comprehensive docs, customer collaboration over contract negotiation, and responding to change over sticking to a plan. That is, while there is value in the things on the right, we value the things on the left more. Hopefully, I can do that. Yep. So, if we look at the things on the right, processes and tools, documentation, contract negotiation, and sticking to a plan, the awesome thing about all of those is it really moves you in on the probability scale. You're much less probable to fail. But the one thing about the cunning way I've drawn that axis is that you do not include 0 probability of failure. You will fail. The Agile methods are focused on trying to reduce the impact of that failure. Dan North, when he gave this, had actually been researching a whole bunch of other people doing stuff after him spending his life in Agile. Now he's gone to look at other people, and he saw that what they had in common was that they reduced the risk, reduced the impact of failure and not the probability. They shipped software and they got an award for having 0 defects. And he's like, that's great. We had thousands of defects, but we caught them all before anyone in production would saw them. So Agile methods have come together to try to help us relax one of the edges of the triangle, and at the same time to reduce the impact of failure so that we can fail and create a failure-friendly environment. Can I get a time check? 25 past. Cool. So, just to bed down how this thingy works a little bit. All of my talks that I gave at conferences last year were about contracts. On the right. So, why would I be talking about something on the right of a manifesto if what we want is the stuff on the left? And I came up with this metaphor to explain why that might be. If you look at the stuff on the right, it's all tangible, like bricks and mortar. You can bank them, you can put them on, people actually put them on their asset registers when you've got a good contract. They do that kind of stuff. So if you build a house, and there's 4 walls to the house there, if each of those walls is a foundation on a very simple house, if you build it just out of bricks and mortar, what do you end up with? You end up with a prison. You've got nothing to move it. If you build it just out of stuff on the left, what do you end up with? A wilderness. You're standing there exposed to the elements. So the guys who came up with all these practices that collectively we call Agile, they're door and window makers. They have patterns that help you walk through walls sometimes see-through walls, because we need the structure of process, docs, negotiation, and sticking to a plan. Okay, I said docs, and some of you may have rolled your eyes. I was looking away on purpose. But a doc that actually supports working software is known as an automated test. They're automated tests that run at different levels. And in each of these tensions, we need to look for things on the, how we can make the things on the right that we're going to have support the things on the left. So that we can build a house, a cathedral, a something that makes more space than there was actually there before, creates safety and the ability to get through things. So to wrap up, and probably as an advert for what's to come, I'd like to just present a little bit on the how two of the leading methods actually achieve what we're looking at doing. So the paper, maybe I call them leading because one is Scrum, the one is XP. And if you were listening carefully, the first paper I read was Scrum and XP from the Trenches by Henrik Knieberg. Be that as it may, we'll start with XP. I'm going to use my cheat sheet because there's a nice formulation on how. So XP recognizes, or XP chooses to start with engineering practices. XP stands for Extreme Programming. Now, the first time I was exposed to XP was actually while I was at UCT, and the first practice I was ever exposed to was pairing. I didn't think much of it at the time because my dev partner, he sat next to me and drank more and more beer, and I finished the project. So that was his explanation of pairing. Since then, I've come to an understanding of how to pair, how to work together, navigate a driver pattern. There's a whole lot of learning in there, but I'm not going to go into that how, as tempting as it is. So on the inner circle of XP are practices that help us when we're actually creating code. So there's pairing, there's test-driven development, there's refactoring, and simple design. So this is creating code. The next circle, there are 12 practices in XP. The next circle is things that help us work together as a team internally. So we've got collective code ownership, having a single repository, and doing things like coding standards, agreeing on how we're going to read and write code together, because code is read a lot more often than it is written. Sustainable pace, because we really don't want to burn out. On the project I mentioned earlier, I went through some burnout. I couldn't get out of bed before 1 p.m. Hello, high water. I didn't want to touch a computer. It was sad, very sad. And continuous integration. Continuous integration is one of my favorite practices, but I don't trust myself to say anything about it without getting down a rabbit hole right now. Suffice to say, it helps you integrate early so that you don't have demo hell. Then on the outer ring of the XP practices, and this diagram was first drawn in 2001, this whole team. So this outer ring deals with how you engage with customers. The whole team approach means get someone from the business or from your solution domain or a target customer into the team so you can ask them questions on a daily basis. If you can't do that, as much exposure as possible. Customer tests. Could mean the customer tests, so he actually clicks through, or you write acceptance tests to have executable documentation based on what the customer is asking for. Small releases. So small releases helps us to, small releases helps us to reduce the impact of failure. We're going to fail, we're going to build the wrong thing, but if we have lots of small releases rather than one big one at the end, Valentine's Day, once a year, 14th of February, I have to give this present, it might be wrong. If you give a lot of extra little presents along the way, it might not be so bad if you give the wrong present on Valentine's Day. And then finally, the planning year. XP actually makes a game out of planning. You put things on cards, you lay them out, and you explain to the customer how little science there is in this process of planning and how much of guess you're making, so that this final circle can tie off with a whole bunch of trust that you develop in the customer or in your Valentine through keeping them constantly involved, getting them to validate things, maybe showing them nice things at the shops, for example, planning a game, working together, and then finally small releases. So as a whirlwind tour of XP, as I said, the idea is to give a few more extra focused ones, probably covering one circle at a time. The other one being Scrum. Just a show of hands, I didn't do this before XP. Anyone heard of XP before today? Good. And Scrum? Okay. Were you familiar with all of those practices? Okay, cool. So I didn't waste your time. Scrum is 3 roles, 3 meetings, 3 artifacts. As a group, do we know what those are? Okay. Cool. So let's start with meetings. So if this is your iteration, we have stand-up meetings in Scrum. Any other meetings?
I don't remember what it's called, but sprint meet or something, about one.
Yeah, so there's a planning meeting up front. There's planning, there's daily stand-up. And then at the end, we have a review. Yep.
Is that monthly meeting? Do you have the customers?
Yeah, so that would be your review at the end of each iteration. So what Scrum does is it tries to build a framework in which you can create an agile process. So firstly, we define our iteration, 1 to 4 weeks, sometimes 6 at a push, but the shorter that is, the more frequent you'll have happy customers and customer check-in. At the beginning, you plan what's going to be done and some time with the team spends together. Daily, as I was mentioning earlier, that was the one practice that we did do when I was on that MS project, was we met together as a team, we made commitments to each other, and then finally you get into a review at the end where you show what you've just built and you need working software. If you don't have working software, you have the second part of the review, which is the retrospective, to figure out how you can change a process so you can have working software the next time. So if those are the 3 meetings that we have in Scrum, then there are 3 artifacts. Any clues on artifacts? Okay, so we've got a task board where we have to-do items, in progress, and done. Very simply, it visualizes to everyone what you're going to be doing. Then you've got a backlog of things that you need to do. So for the whole project, you don't want to do all of that at once, but this list sometimes gets very long, about 40 to 60 items is ideal. And then finally, you have a burn down, tracking items to do versus time. This is your ship date, and you can sort of see that you might cut items out to try to make it in and deliver. But over time, there's an iteration level burn down and there's a project level burn down, but you use that as a very simple visualization to check if you're on track as you burn through the work remaining in the project. So we've got 3 meetings, 3 artifacts. This chart, literally paper up on the wall, it's the best format. If you email it to people, you know what it is. And then we've got our 3 roles. There are more than 3 roles in creating software, but Scrum defines 3 specific roles in that there's a product owner whose role it is to focus on the backlog and make sure it's in priority order. Do we know this? No? Yes? Product owner? Yeah? Okay, then there's the team whose job it is to move items across the task board in the physical world, but actually to create the software that's going to get from that was discussed in the plan into the review. And then Scrum defines this unusual role called the Scrum Master, who's there to keep an eye on the whole process and help be orthogonal to the flow of value to try to make sure that we're doing things in the best way we can and spot mistakes that we blind ourselves to when we're actually delivering. So that's a view as to what might happen next. The story I told you earlier about the Agile Manifesto, that was 10 years ago. The industry has done stuff, well, 13 years, done stuff for the last 13 years. It's very mushy stuff, touchy-feely. there's very, very hard and dry stuff. Both ends of the manifesto have been well explored in terms of what processes we might have or how we might, get grips with ourselves and the sort of human system dynamics side of things. And we've met friends along the way in terms of lean, in the lean space, the Toyota Way and Kanban. Very similar process, and there's now Agile Lean Europe is an unconference because the two camps war at times, but the conference I spoke at last year is just about people getting together to talk about software process. And I am now looking forward to hopefully giving a few more talks or presentations here, focusing on, in particular, some aspects of Scrum and XP, because I think, A, they'll equip us to get back into industry from here. I'm assuming quite a large number of people here are going to go into industry. On the other hand, I think there's a lot of value to bringing some of these practices into these walls to help us with delivery on our honors and postgrad projects and getting the visibility out and through. So thanks very much for the chance to tell you guys about this. I really would have hoped I had it when I was here, because it took me 5 years after leaving UCT to actually find agile practices first. And yeah, thanks very much. Any questions?
Which is like the most common Scrum?
In South Africa, you'll find Scrum most commonly. Yeah, they work together very well. I didn't highlight that, but XP as engineering practices work well inside of Scrum, which is more of an organizational practice.
I briefly used Scrum as an internship, and we were told to always pick more tasks in the to-do than we could do. That way only the best features would be added to the program. So we'd deliberately not do some features.
Okay. That's not textbook Scrum by any means. Generally, that's a project management technique to try to get people to do more than they want to do. Generally, that also leads to demotivation and to unrealistic goals. Because if you can make a sprint commitment, so this iteration is referred to in Scrum as a sprint, you can make your sprint commitment that you plan for, that's what we're going to do, and you do it at the end, then you get a really, really useful thing, which is velocity, which is the gradient of this
Yes,
burn
we
down.
would keep velocity, and we would attempt to ensure constant velocity as opposed to completing all the tasks.
Okay, so you would just take in extra items. Like some teams will call that below the line items, and other teams will just happily take in more than they can. I prefer to have something achievable. And the other thing is then you can create some time for slack. So, if you finish, you've got time, because management never sees the need to work on your continuous integration or the need to reinstall your dev environment. So sometimes it's also a good way to work in structured slack. Get tasks on a continuous improvement backlog you might want to do. Any others? Back there? I saw you. Cool. Well, thanks everyone. I hope I'm on time. Excellent. So.